Whether you drive a Mazda or not, I'm sure you're aware of the phenomenal grassroots support that they provide to us drivers. They've got contingency programs, discounted parts. If you win a national championship in a Mazda in a road race series, you have the opportunity for a fully paid drive in the MX-5 Cup from Battery Tender. So there's a lot of stuff that they do for us. And today they helped us put together our panelists who are going to share some really valuable information for us. So everyone attending the webinar today should give Mazda a little shout out on social media, Facebook or Twitter. If you can see this, even cones know that Mazda's great. So let's dive in. So the rules today, we're going to hold the questions until the end. We'll have some dedicated time for Q&A, but I want to make sure that our panelists have enough time to get through each of their short presentations. Today we've got some, frankly, amazing people who are going to share some info with you. Karen Babb has been autocrossing since 1979. She started in a Mazda. She first ran the Solo Nationals in 1980 and started designing local courses back then. She was inducted into the SCCA Hall of Fame in 2011, and when that happened, she was already a 20-time SCCA national champion, so clearly she knows her stuff. She's also co-chair of the 2015 Tire Rack Solo Nationals, as well as a course designer, and she's going to take a dive into the mind of a course designer today to give you some ideas on how to make the most of a course walk. We have Neal today, who will be our middle presenter. He's a 6-time podium finisher at the SCCA Solo Nationals. He enjoys working with other drivers in their cars to find more speed, and he instructs at the Solo Pro driving schools. He's also the author behind conecoach.com, which is a website where you can get solo-specific advice on going faster. So a great bookmark to add and to read. And finally, Rachel is our third presenter. She's got 7 years of competition experience. Last year, she became the CSL National Champion after going undefeated in the 2014 Championship Tours. Congrats. She competes at the regional and the national level. She just took home first place in CSL at the San Diego Tour recently. She'll be talking about how to use a teammate to go faster. So really interesting stuff that I hadn't considered before that I think you guys will find interesting as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen. She doesn't have a camera today, but she'll unmute her mic, and I'll let her take over from here.
Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me. No, this computer doesn't have a webcam, and that's actually a good thing because you don't want to look at me in the morning. Want to thank Mazdaspeed and Motorsports Reg for this. I started in a first-gen RX-7, and one of my current objects of car lust is the new Miata I saw at MSX. It's really kind of cool to have this associated with Mazda. What I'm going to talk about is essentially how to optimize your course walking. One of the things I see with new people coming out these days is a lot of them essentially do one course walk and think that's good enough. I'm going to kind of try to advocate a couple more than that, or at least some phases that you can use to go through your course walking process to help you get a little more out of it. When I looked over the people who'd signed up for this, a significant number of them were in the 0 to 10 events or 10 to 25 events groups. So essentially in your first couple years, that's great. It's wonderful to be there because at that stage of your autocross existence, you're on the steep part of the learning curve. You get faster every run, and it's a really rewarding thing to make tweaks to what you do so you can get better. So congratulations, it's great to be there. So let's see if I can make this work. Yay. From a designing standpoint, there are things that you do creating a design that are similar to the things that you can do walking to try to get the most out of what you're doing, analyzing the course. The design process can break down into route selection, where you figure out how you're going to get through the site, putting elements on that route, where you figure out where the sweepers are going to go, where the slalom's going to go, that kind of thing, and fine-tuning what you end up with once you put the elements in place, to put it all together to make a design that works. Walkthrough process can kind of follow that. The first thing you worry about is the route, familiarization with the route. I've kind of, for the purposes of having a one-term thing, called it navigation. Second phase is looking at the elements that are on that route, figuring out where you want to put the car, tight, wide, apexes, that sort of thing. I'm characterizing that one with calculation. And then fine-tuning. Once you know where it goes and what you're going to try to do, what are the specific things that you're going to do with that car on that course at that point to optimize what it can do for you? And I'm calling that one execution. Okay, priority-wise, navigation is obviously first. You need to find the course. DNFs suck. You can't win with DNFs. That is the one that most people usually sort of get right. They'll go out there for their one walkthrough and they'll know where it goes. If you can spend a little more time than that, you can move on to calculation, figure out where you want to put the car, what your apexes are. If there's options, you can deal with that. And ideally, you have enough time to go through and actually get detailed about your plan for that first run. It's all about making sure the first run does as much for you as it can. It should not just be a decent, fast run, but it should put you in a position to improve across the rest of your runs for the day. And if you can have all these things in place, you're kind of ready for that. Okay, navigation. Obviously, familiarity breeds confidence. You can't go out and drive fast if you don't know where you're going. One of the most important things they teach you at any autocross school is looking ahead. And looking ahead while driving shouldn't be spent on trying to find the course. You should already know where the course goes. You know where you want to put the car. You should be looking ahead to confirm the exact spot you want that car, since where you look is where you're going to go. It's like a lot of other things. It's like skiing. So you want to make sure that you're not looking ahead for navigation purposes. You've already done that. You're looking ahead for driving car placement purposes. And you need to remember, at speed, it's all going to come up really fast. You're not going to have time to look for it. So you want to be already knowing where it goes by the time you get out there in the car. And these days, you need to be ready for anything. You may have a course designer who's really good at providing visuals that you can see, that you can look ahead. They don't obscure stuff. You may be having somebody who's new, somebody who's done it a lot, somebody who likes a lot of cones, somebody who doesn't like many cones at all. You have to be ready for all that, so you have to allow time for the walkthrough to make sure you know where you're going to go no matter what you get. You can get a sadistic wacko like me or like Roger, and then you really need some time. Okay, basics. Planning your walkthrough. How many do you have time for? Again, I see some folks show up 5 minutes before registration and tech closes, slam themselves through those processes and zip out and take one walkthrough. For people who've been at it for a while and they're used to the visual language of an autocross course, that might be okay. When you're trying to improve, you're on that steep part of the learning curve, it's better to get there early enough to plan for 2 or 3. I'm an old fart and I still like to have more than that because I really want to know what I'm going to do before I go out there. And I probably have a really crappy memory. I don't know. When you're allocating your time, a typical walkthrough of a large course, meaning national size course, national tour, something like that, can take 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how fast you walk. If you jog it, maybe you can do it in 10, but it's not something you're going to do in 5 minutes. If you're going to plan for 3 of them, you probably want to allocate at least half an hour. While you're walking, things to do while you're walking. You need to focus on the cones and where you're supposed to go and where you're not supposed to go, so you avoid those things. I see people out there walking the course on the phone. That's not going to help. Don't talk with other people during the walkthrough about anything but the course. It's okay to say, well, where do you think you should be here? Are you going to break there? That kind of stuff will come in handy later. But don't be talking about the movie you saw last night or your new wheels or whatever. Focus on the course while you're walking. And be sure to look up and ahead. Don't look at the stuff that's 20 feet in front of you. Look at the stuff that's 50, 100, 150 feet in front of you and further out, because that's where you're going to be trying to put the car in a hurry when you get there. While you're walking, notice whether there's stuff that's hard to find, stuff that's easy to find. If you can't see something easily when you're walking through the course, stop for a second, figure out what the tricks are to getting through there, and study a little bit, again, so it's in your head, so you're not looking for it on a course hunt when you're driving. This is another one that I see a lot of people doing. Don't walk around the course with the map in your hand looking at the map. Ideally, you don't look at the map unless you need it to tell you where an option is. or if there's something particularly confusing and you want to make sure where it goes. If you can find the course without looking at the map on your walkthrough, it's going to imprint itself in your head better. You're going to be able to find it better when you're driving. So don't look at the map on that walkthrough unless you have to. Sections. It really helps when you're thinking about where to go to break the thing down into sections. And this is kind of how designers work too. They don't think about 2 cones here, 4 cones there. They think about sections. I have this route. I'm going to put a slalom, a sweeper, offsets, whatever on that route. It's easier for you to remember a half dozen sections than 150 cones or more, or 35 turns, or something with greater complexity. So think about it in sections. Break it down in your head some way that works for you while you're walking through it. Oh, this is a 5-cone slalom. That's an increasing radius sweeper onto a sequence of S's, things of that nature. You might see different sections than the designer had in mind when they do the map. That's okay. But break it down into a number of sections that work for you to remember. This will also help you when you're doing your plan of attack calculation phase and your execution phase. If you get the chance, pause a little bit at the start of each of these sections. Oh, I'm just entering the slalom. Pause and look through the whole thing. See what it's like going through it to get to the other end. This again will help you get it stamped in your brain. Note how sections connect to each other. Sometimes it's a little hard to see how to get from section 1 to section 2. If that's an issue, be ready for it later. Sometimes it's going to be hard to set up getting from section 1 to section 2. You'll need to know that later. Other characteristics. Okay, the last part of navigation is options. If you never see an optional slalom or optional element in your area or at events you go to, then you don't have to worry about this. But on the regional level particularly, a lot of times you do see them. So as part of navigation, you need to know which side you're going to go on. On your first run, you don't want to be out there heading for a slalom thinking, gee, do I go right or left? So look at it on that walkthrough, pick a side, and this can be interesting, and be ready for that first run. Sometimes the designer will make a choice on something like this challenging. They'll have a trade-off in the entry and a trade-off on the exit, and it's not straightforward to decide what you're going to do. Sometimes they're nice and they make it obvious. If it's not an obvious choice, take a look at what's before the optional element and what's after it, and decide which one's more important. Standard practice says that what you do coming onto a fast section, onto a straightaway, is more important than what you do coming off of one. And it's the type 1 versus type 2 theory. So you may end up making a choice based on that, based on, are you optimizing the fast section you're headed for versus the one you're coming off of? You may make a different choice if you have a small, light car. A Miata person may choose something different than a Corvette person. Because the Corvette guy can get the speed back in a hurry, the small light car might be better off on a line that allows him to maintain speed. You may not be able to decide until walkthrough number 2 or 3. Walk each side if you get the chance and see what each one feels like. See what it's like when you get to the other end. That's usually when you find out whether or not you made the right choice. If you have a co-driver, you walk one side, they walk the other. Compare notes when you get to the other end. In the worst case scenario, sometimes you actually have to try each one on your first and second runs because you're not sure, and then pick the one that worked best for your third run and on. And of course, you can always just make yourself in the back of grid and sandbag and see what others decide to do. Sometimes that actually works. Plagiarize from somebody else. But the whole point is to give yourself as much information as you can so you can get through correctly. Okay, calculation. This is where you put the car in the right place. So you're walking the second time through, you know where it goes. Now you're noticing, and you can combine this with phase 1 if you're in a real hurry. Now you're noticing dimensions and attributes that are going to make a difference to where you put the car in terms of feet and inches. Things like negative or positive lateral cone offsets. Designer can take a 5-cone slalom that plays like a slalom and turn it into something completely different by taking that middle cone and offsetting it 2 or 3 feet one way or the other. Be aware of those things. Be aware of turn widths or lack thereof. Some sadistic designers like to make a really big wide turn so it looks like you've got all the room in the world when the best line is actually kind of narrow. Roger calls this the give them room to hang themselves approach, and yes, that's probably a good characterization. So make note of things that are not necessarily useful in terms of dimensions. Also take a look at surface camber. If you run on a parking lot, odds are you're going to have some positive or negative camber, slopes to the inside or slopes to the outside of the turn. This is going to affect how much speed you can carry in a given element, and you're going to need to be ready for that when you come up to it in the car. Surface texture changes. Sometimes you have a site that's half blacktop and half concrete. Ellensburg comes to mind. You can be transitioning from crappy blacktop to gravel. I thought I said concrete. Whatever. Blacktop to concrete. From old surface to new surface, from coarse to smooth. If you're doing that in the middle of a turn, and sometimes your sadistic designers will arrange that for you, you're going to have to be ready for what's going to happen. If the better stick is towards the exit of the turn, you can get on the power sooner coming out. If the better stick is towards the entry, you're going to have to give it up a little bit as you come to the exit. There's going to be sand and gravel buildup on some sites, particularly blacktop site. If you run early in the day, it's not such a big deal, but if you're in the second run group or later and they don't sweep the course a whole lot, you might find that there's going to be crud in the line you thought you wanted. If it's rained recently, there might be a puddle in the line you thought you wanted. And there are going to be times when you will choose a bad line because the surface is better there. That's okay. It's faster to make sure the car sticks. Also, when you're trying to work on car placement, pay attention to the cones that actually do something and try to ignore the ones that don't. There are going to be meaningless cones out there. Some people put them out there to help you visually. Some people put them out there not to help you visually. This is a very simplistic example of the useless cones paradigm. Some people like to put a bunch of cones out there and make a course element look like something. This one looks like kind of an ugly lane change. When you're picking your route, if you step back and take a look at it, it's really this, exactly the same dimensions. It's a slalom. It's a simple, basic slalom. Ignore the stuff that doesn't matter. Focus on the ones that do. So this is your second pass, and you're looking for where you're going to put the car. The only cones that matter are those ones that define what the element really is. If you simplify that, it's going to be less confusing when you're coming at it at speed. Okay, one thing that new people sometimes run into is not having a big comfort zone with their car. This was my bugaboo for the early years of my existence in Autocross. The car was capable of doing a lot more than I thought. And so what Ron, who was helping me out immensely, got me to do was find places where I was comfortable with going a little too fast and see if I could make it. And 99% of the time, sure I could. And that would teach me more in that particular item about what the car could do than just about anything else that particular day. Wide sweepers with generous exits where you probably won't hit cones on the way out. Might not be the best line, but it's going to be a decent clean run even if you get a little off. Large open gaps from one element or section to the next. You're coming off a slalom and it's 150 feet to the next turn. You can go for it a little early coming out of that slalom and see what the car will let you do. It's a good opportunity to learn what your car can do. This doesn't mean be crazy, but it means when you're on the learning curve, give your car a chance to show you that it's better than you think it is. On the other end of the scale, tight elements. Some people will put in nasty little transitions from one section to another where you have to set up for something like a 90 or worse that is just plain small and there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to go slow to be fast. The transition time, if you keep traction and don't get into either understeer or oversteer, will be better. You want to carve through the thing and get it done and get set up for the next thing. So you have to plan to be patient. You're just not going to optimize it if you overdrive it. So plan for that when you're on the calculation pass. Execution. Okay, this is the detailed stuff. This is what I really depend on in my walkthroughs, because this is what tells me the last important details of what I'm going to try to do on that first run. One thing you run into is a concept that Ron calls sacrifice and gain, and there are plenty of designers who will specifically build this in, where what you do 3 or 4 gates back or further is going to either bite you or help you when you get to a particular point. It may require you to give up speed to gain it somewhere else. It may require you to set up a little differently to be ready for the entry to a fast section that's coming. You need to know that it's coming, you need to be looking ahead, and you need to be thinking about the sacrifice and gain aspect. And to optimize that first run, you really need to make a plan. You need to focus on where you're going to put the car. If you're me or like me, you need to really think about brake, shift, and throttle points. I'm not an instinctive driver. I have to plan ahead for this stuff. If you are a pure seat-of-the-pants instinctive driver, you just go out and do it on instinct. My co-driver is one of those, drives me crazy. Then it's not quite so important to have that plan. But if you are still on the learning curve and trying to optimize your car, having that plan for that first run sets you up for success, not only on that one, but on the ones that follow, because you can make adjustments between your runs. Your first run, if you executed your plan, you can say, well, I could have gone faster there, or I needed to brake a little more there, needed to be in wider to this particular turn, needed to come out of this one a little tighter. So you can plan for these adjustments on that last walkthrough and think about those elements that you're not really sure how they're going to work out. You're going to go in wide to a certain turn, out tight from it onto the next thing, but you're not sure just how tight you have to be. Think about that on that last walkthrough. You can make an adjustment to that between run number 1 and 2. A caution on this is be prepared to only try to fix a couple of things. You can't fix 20 different turns between runs. It'll drive you crazy. Pick out the ones that were the most important, the ones that you felt really made the biggest difference to your time. Typically, those are going to be, again, entries onto fast sections or things that you really blew because maybe your plan was a little too optimistic in terms of the brake point. Only fix a couple of things at a time. Power on sooner is a good one. Lifting later. I've had plenty of opportunities to do this from one run to the next because I'll assume I'm going to have to lift for a certain offset, for example, and I'll go through it and I'll do my planned lift and go, that was way too easy. So next time maybe I'll try it flat out, or next time I'll try it with much less of lift. These things can make a big difference in your time. Ron got me a couple of seconds at a Nationals one time by saying, oh, no, you don't have to lift for that at all. I thought he was crazy. But because I trusted him, I went out and tried it, and sure enough, there was no problem. I had planned for a lift at that point, but it was unnecessary, and it was a huge improvement to not do that. Those are things that you can adjust between runs, assuming you had a plan in the first place. Another thing you might end up doing is you might find that tight, nasty, ugly little section that you thought you were set up for was actually worse than you thought, and you're going to have to set up a little earlier. That's pretty easy to do. You just think about the entry to the turn. Okay, I was 2 car widths off that cone. I need to be 3. That's pretty straightforward to do too. The only other thing that came to mind in all this was a classic mistake I've seen, even at the national level, is people not walking through the exit all the way to the end and DNFing the finish. It's really kind of embarrassing. It's helpful to know how to get back to grid, and it's probably better not to blow the exit past the last pointer cone because you don't know where it goes. So on one of the walkthroughs, typically the navigation one, go through all the way to the end, make sure you know what to do at the finish, because sometimes they have strange little routing devices at the finish to get you back to grid. That is all I have, so I guess I'll pass it off to the next person.
Okay, phase 1 was learning where to go and having a plan and figuring out how you're going to attack the course over the course of your runs and then what to do between runs from a plan perspective. So phase 2 here with Neal is going to be how you can do the more technical side of planning and analysis using data acquisition and some other goodies so that you if you're some left brain, right brain, you can kind of exercise both of those pieces. So Neal, go ahead and click on and take it over.
Anyway, Thanks for having me here, and really pretty excited about this. I rejoined the Mazda fold last year when I got my CSP Miata, and after doing an RX-8 a few years prior to that, it reminded me that Mazda really is, I think, has the best support for autocrossers in the industry. Their racer support program, doing webinars like this, the contingency, it's all been really awesome to be back running a Mazda again. And also a big shout out to MSR Motorsports Reg, our local club here. Shout out to the Minnesota Autosports Club folks. We're just moving over to MSR this year, and so far so good. We're really enjoying it. It's kind of hard to follow up Karen Babb. If you've ever heard the term national style course, she's the one who defined what that is, at least for me. So it's really the stuff that she has to say about course design, how to read a course and walk it, is really amazing. We're going to be talking a little bit about data logging. So everything Karen said hopefully helped you prep for that first run. Now let's talk a little bit about how to analyze what happened during that run and what to do on your next run. So we're going to take a little bit, there's two topics that we're going to cover here. One of them is a little bit about the kind of hardware and equipment and setup, the tools that you can use to do data logging. And then the second thing we're going to do is a real quick overview of how you can actually use some of these tools to analyze your run. We're going to take a little bit of a three bears approach to the tools and equipment section. Really, we're going to talk first about the basic stuff that you can do, and then we'll kind of do a flip on the other end of the pendulum and talk about pro level equipment that's actually pretty accessible to autocrossers if you're serious about it, though definitely not free. And then we'll end up talking about kind of the sweet spot of the best bang for the buck. But really, the basics, don't discount. Data logging is really all about finding objective ways to measure your performance. So that can be done in any way. The most obvious one is looking at the clock at the end of the run. Another one is chalking your tires, which a lot of people kind of know how to do. I just had a post recently that covered some of that stuff on my blog, so I don't want to go into too much detail there. Some people talk about putting zip ties on their shock absorbers to measure whether their shocks are bottoming out. That actually helped me with my street modified car a number of years ago, because I found out the handling problems I had were not because the suspension was bottoming out. Then I put some tape around my drive shaft, and after the next run, I realized, the tape's all beat up. It was hitting the inner fender of the car. But we're finding factual things and data-oriented things to analyze our performance. One of the other ones too is to pictures from that other people have taken of your runs. If you go to nationals, you can go to .com or .cone.com and look at all the pictures of yourself and your competitors. Is your car leaning more than others? Does it look more upset than others? There's objective ways to do those sorts of things. On the pro side of things, you've got a number of different hardware packages out there. The one that you've traditionally seen is from Race Technology called the DL1. I've run one of those for almost 10 years now. There's a new one out from Autosport Labs that looks really exciting. It's actually an open source kit, so you could actually build it yourself. But it actually, is great. Good price to go buy the one that they provide pre-built. There's a couple of others, but the two at the top there are really the ones that seem to be really well geared toward autocrossers. But what you're going to get out of these that you aren't getting out of the sort of best bang for the buck ones, there's really two things. One is going to be the accuracy of the data. The sensors in these boxes are much more accurate, and they sample at faster rates. So you can build more accurate graphs and a more accurate track map. And if you're looking and really trying to analyze your line through a turn, that can be useful. But that costs a lot of money for that. The other thing that you get is sensors. And the big thing about that is that you can start putting sensors on your steering wheel, on your brake pedal, on your gas pedal, and you can actually start getting at the cause of why your car was faster through the section. And we can talk a little more about that. Some of the middle of the road packages, they're starting to introduce some of those features. So, again, these tools are a little harder to use. They're quite a bit more expensive, but they are really valuable in a lot of ways. The middle of the road option, the most simple one, is to just simply get a camera. And we don't necessarily think about that as data logging, but really it is. Being able to look at your runs and compare them to your previous runs, compare them to your co-drivers, and there are even some freeware software out there to set them up side by side so that you can actually go through the run bit by bit and see minor changes. Is a really simple way to learn more about your run. We're actually going to be covering cameras a little bit more in my next blog post, specifically on where to mount them and those sorts of things. So the middle of the road packages, usually these are going to be your best bang for the buck. They're usually going to be based on some sort of phone or tablet, either iPhone or an Android phone or tablet. And there's a couple of kind of typical options. MaxQ data, as far as I'm aware, isn't around anymore, except I saw somebody using one last weekend. And it's, for a long time there, that was a really great, very simple, easy to use system. It actually ran on an old Windows CE Palm device of some sort that was kind of weird. And I think there was a PC-based version of the software. If you find one used, or if you've got a friend who has one, that can still be a good tool. On the left side of your screen there, we've got Harry's Lap Timer, Race Chrono. There's a whole bunch of kind of new wave of iPhone and Android device apps that they're great for measuring G-forces, these sorts of things. They tend to be very geared towards track days and lapping days and large tracks that are closed loop courses. They don't tend to be as good for autocrossers, but they are very affordable and they do a good job. The one in the center there is Solo Storm by Petrol Data Systems. This is really, I'm not, paid or sponsored to plug anything here today, but the fact is, and I think this is just an objective fact, that these guys have spent more time talking to autocrossers, building an autocross specific solution than anybody else. And it's really, they've been out a couple of years now, and it really shows. It's really quite intuitive to use and provides a lot of real valuable information to autocrossers. It's very specific to autocrossing. And the one thing, though, that's worth mentioning about all of these systems is that in their basic mode, they rely on the sensors in the phone, both the GPS and the accelerometers. And when you think about it, these manufacturers of tablets and phones, the only reason they put an accelerometer in these phones is so that they can tell when you flip it from landscape to portrait and back again. And so they don't sample at a very high rate. Same thing with the GPS. It really is designed to help Google Maps work better. It's not designed to measure your GPS position every 6 inches along the pavement while you're doing 60 miles an hour. So one of the best things you can do with almost all of these systems is pair them with a little Bluetooth GPS dongle. That's what you see on the far left of your screen. Some of them now will do a OBD2 interface to your car's computer, and that's where you can now start picking up additional data like RPM from the engine, as well as throttle position on some of the newer cars. Some of them as well are starting to do integration with cameras. And so, for example, Solo Storm will integrate with a GoPro and actually turn the GoPro on and off. And between runs, it'll actually download the data and synchronize it so that you can see the data next to your runs, which is pretty amazing. I find that's a little bit challenging in practice because processing that much data, that much video on a phone or a tablet takes a long time, eats up a lot of battery. And so I usually don't do that at the track with Solo Storm, but useful information there. And then later on, one of the things that some of these are starting to do now, again, Solo Storm is starting to do this, is actually integrate with the pro level data boxes that we were just talking about, the DL1 and the Race Capture Pro. I actually have my DL1 plugged into my Solo Storm system so that I actually get all the accuracy out of the better sensors on those black boxes right into the easy to use software that's Solo specific in Solo Storm. So no matter what you use, the next thing that we're going to do is really kind of talk a little bit about how to actually use this information. And I don't care whether you're using the pro level stuff or whether you're just talking about data that you collected from chalking your tires. You need to record the context, because really this is just data. If you know that run was faster, but you don't know why, for example, because you changed your shocks or because you changed your tire pressures or something like that, it really kind of doesn't matter. It's hard to reproduce the situations to go faster on the next run. So write down the context of what the car felt like on that run and what changes you made to the car, so that you can combine that with the data later, link that up, and give yourself a whole picture. The other thing that you really need to do is corroborate your evidence. And Rachel's going to talk about this a little bit more on hers, but use your co-drivers, use your friends that are spectating. Find out what they could see or your co-drivers felt on their runs. Sometimes it seems odd that the data says one thing, but you felt another. And sometimes you can find a link that you didn't expect between those two things and why it came out that way. Most of the time, of course, you felt that the car stepped out and slid a little in that corner. Well, that's what the data shows too, but sometimes it's not always quite what you expected. So we'll go through kind of an example analysis of using a data logger. We're going to use SoloStorm here because that's become really, a great tool that I use myself, and I'm very familiar with it. But most of the tips that we're going to talk about here apply to using the analysis software from Race Technologies on the DL1, as well as some general, theoretical processes that you can follow with any of these other pieces of software. The first thing that you really want to do is set your start and finish gates. That really helps the software line up two traces, runs back to back, so that you can compare the graphs of G-forces from your turns and your accelerations one on top of each other. Because a lot of times, where we stage and where we start are two different places. We don't always stage in quite exactly the same place. It isn't so important that you set the staging marker exactly where the real start line was or that the finish line was. I really don't care if it's plus or minus 5 feet, as long as it's after the car started moving and before the car is decelerating after the finish, so that you have reference points and the software can line those up. We're not using this as a timing system, so if it's another 5 feet and the run's, a tenth of a second longer than what it showed on the clock, I don't care about that stuff. I don't follow that. But you really want to set those markers. And then the sectors is kind of an optional thing. It's nice to be able to look at sector times sometimes, and some other pieces of software don't do the stuff we'll talk about next as well. In those cases, sector times can be really helpful. But I actually don't always really refer to sector times too much. So once we've got the start and finish gates done, now we can actually really start the analysis. And the most important thing that we need to do is to determine the events that matter, the places to zero in on the analysis. You've got 60 seconds of data, give or take, for that run. How do you find out which of those 60 seconds in that data log matter? And so you need to find a way to do that. The most convenient way to do that is if you have SoloStorm or a DL1, they have something very similar called, on the DL1, it's called a time slip graph. On SoloStorm, it's called a time delta. And that's what we'll be using in a moment. But if you don't have those, that's where you can use the sector times, or sometimes you can do sort of a playback where you actually watch the two little icons follow each other around, and you can see where one of them gets ahead of the other, and that allows you to sort of say, oh, something happened there, somebody got ahead. But that's what you're looking for, is that moment where something happened that you care about. And then the second step is figuring out why. And we'll show this in a second, but what I like to look at first is your miles per hour, and then I go back and figure out what were the steering, throttle, brake inputs that resulted in that change. So here we've got a run in SoloStorm. This is myself versus my friend Jay in the same car. And as you can see here, that Jay was only slower on this run by about 3.5 tenths over the whole run. It's about a 62-second run. So, that was a fairly close race between the two of us. But what was interesting about it is, well, first let's start with, how to read this screen. That 0 section will go numerically here on these little blue notes. So if you start at 0 up above, that vertical line running down the middle of the graph means that that's where now is. And so if you look at the position of the X's on the track map, and then look at the graph, that's where that lines up. So if we go to number 1, you can see there's a big orange band. This is the time delta graph on SoloStorm, and it even color codes it to say, hey, something happened here. Look for a big wide orange band. Then we go to number 2, and you can see that back there, a few seconds earlier, we were actually even. And at number 3, you can see that green, which is me, gained 6/10 in 2 corners. And if you go to number 4, you can look at the miles per hour and say, wow, we're looking at 12 miles an hour, 11 miles an hour faster in a matter of 2 corners. Now we're on here. What's going on? It's 11 miles an hour, 6/10 gain in 5 seconds. Well, wait a minute. I only beat Jay by 3.5 tenths. So that means I was actually slower everywhere else. So Jay's a little frustrated at this point because he threw it all away in 2 corners. So out of a 62-second course, there were only 5 seconds that really mattered for Jay. So how do we figure out what exactly happened? So we'll move backwards. We'll start at number 5 here. We'll move backwards in time to when this all began. If you go to number 6 now, we're only 0.2 of a mile an hour faster. And the markers are aligned. So this was 0, 0 time delta. So we're even on track. But we end up 0.6 ahead at the end of that little section that we were looking at a moment ago. If you go down to number 7, then you can see where I broke a little bit harder. The longitudinal G's sunk very quickly. So I grabbed a bunch of brake right there. You can see in the red line that Jay didn't. You go to number 8, and you can see that that resulted in my miles per hour dipping a bit right there. And then you go to number 9, and you can see, well, being a little slower and positioning the car a little better helped me grab gas earlier and harder. And then you go to number 10, where you can see that Jay, probably also because he maybe overcooked a little corner there, had to correct and get out of the gas. And so that's how you kind of can use this analysis to really figure out what happened. And so you can see that in a span of 5 seconds, Jay threw away 0.6 of a second and actually ended up being slower overall just because of that 5-second span. So in summary, regarding the gear, find creative ways to be objective. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can use chalk and photos. But video is intuitive, easy, and inexpensive. Really, I think the sweet spot is having a phone or a tablet and a GPS nugget. That's a great bang for the buck. If you're going to invest some money in making yourself a better driver, that's where I would start. And then you can later go to the pro level to add sensors for steering inputs and so forth. On the analysis, there's really 3 things that matter. One is get to the scene of the crime. Figure out a way using whatever tools you got to find where the exciting things happen that mattered. Then start to look for clues in the miles per hour and the latitude, longitude. And then you have to recognize that sometimes the genius move that resulted in that going ahead, Karen talked about how sections get linked together. Well, this is how it plays out in the data. And you can see that how setting up something 3 corners earlier made a huge difference just a few seconds later. So that's about all I've got. I'm a little over time, and I apologize. But I'll turn that back over.
Awesome. Thanks, Neal. So, okay, we've got a plan. We've executed that plan a couple of times. We're looking at some of the technical details of how to go faster. And now Rachel's going to tell us you don't have to work alone, basically. How can we take advantage of a teammate in a variety of ways to be overall a better team? I know that in Spec Miata racing, which is the kind of racing I do primarily, having a teammate is a huge deal on a racetrack, and I hadn't really considered how important it could be in solo. So I'll let Rachel take over and share that with you.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Brian, and just thank you, Motorsports Reg, and Mazdaspeed for putting this on. I think there's some really great information here. Hopefully, dive right into it. And first, I'm going to talk about get out of working with another person. I'm also going to talk about how to choose a partner. Really, you can't work with just anybody, or it's not optimal, so you won't get the best benefit. How to really make sure you're maximizing both of your potentials. And I'm going to finish with benefits, why you might not actually want a teammate, and what other options might be open to you as far as working with other people. I'm going to first start out with talking about why you might want to team up in solo. Solo really, in my situation, has best been done not as an actual solo sport. I've gotten just a ton out of working with a partner. Actually went from last place at my first nationals to first place at my second go-around. So it's really made a big difference in my performance, and I think can be beneficial to everybody else. The first benefit that I'd like to talk about is financial. If you can find somebody who's willing to split costs with you on travel, gas, entries to events, parts, everything like that, it really can make your whole situation easier. Being a college student, that's been huge to me. It's actually opened up the opportunity to compete at the national level, whereas before, it was just a little out of my price range. There's also the emotional and mental support you get from a co-driver. I can't emphasize enough how big your mental preparation and your mental focus when you're actually competing is. It really makes the difference between winning and losing, I think. So having that focus, having somebody there to just bring you back down to earth when you psych yourself out is huge. It also helps you be a more adaptable and flexible driver. Seeing how somebody else drives. They might have a different driving style or just use a different technique in certain places. Really just opens up your repertoire and adds more things that you might be able to try that you might not have thought about. You guys may also be able to swap cars, which is great because it helps you to be able to know how to drive multiple vehicles, which makes you more flexible as a driver as a whole. Also, you get access to a long-term coach that knows your individual strengths and weaknesses, as well as your driving style. So they'll begin to know what works for you, what doesn't work for you, how to communicate with you specifically, which really has helped me grow. So how do you choose the right partner? Co-driving sounds great. So what do I look for in somebody else? I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, what are you hoping to gain? Are you looking to, find new techniques, figure out how to use a different driving style? Are you trying to improve upon your current driving style? What role do you want to play in a partnership? Do you want to be a coach and a teacher, a student? Do you want somebody who's really kind of an even match for you? Each position kind of has an advantage. As a teacher, you're forced to really communicate with somebody else and make sure you know what you're talking about, which just, reinforces your behaviors and makes sure that, you really know what you're talking about. As a student, if you're able to work with somebody with more experience, obviously that can only help you get better. Being an even match with your co-driver is also really interesting. It causes you to really push yourself and have them push themselves as well. You can't use the excuse at that point of, my car was slower. You're driving the same car, so it really comes down to what are you doing as a driver that's either making you faster or slower than the person that you're working with. Financial considerations are also really important when you're trying to choose a partner. Can you guys agree on how to split costs? Are you going to split costs? Is one person going to bear, the majority of the financial burden while the other person maybe does the work on the car? So some things to consider. You're definitely going to want somebody who can compromise with you on that type of thing. As well as, can you spend long periods of time with this person? Me and my co-driver, when we're going to nationals, we're in a car and, pretty much with each other for 24 hours straight, almost 7 days a week. If you don't like the person you're working with, it's going to make it really, really difficult, and it can actually wreck friendships and it won't help you, if you're not able to really communicate well and get along with the person that you're working with. Also scheduling concerns. Are you guys available to do the same events? Can you make time outside of autocross to get together and coordinate, work on the car, talk about things? And as far as, how do you actually go out there and find somebody? Go around at your local events, ask people to take a ride with you, see if you can take a ride with them, talk to them about the course, find out who you can communicate with, and bring the idea up to them. Hey, this might help both of us. What do you think about teaming up? All right. So how do you make the most of a partnership? I'm going to break this down into 5 different sections. I think 5 different ways you can work with your partner to really maximize both of your potential. I'm going to begin with planning and car prep. Then we'll talk about practice, course walking, what to do during an event, and what you can do after events and in between events to make the most out of your partnership. As far as planning and car preparation go, before you partner up, before you begin actually competing with your partner, make sure you have a financial plan in place. Make sure you guys know how you're going to take care of unexpected costs that might arise, expenses for the whole season. Break it up, or at least talk about how you're going to deal with these things so they don't become a conflict down the road. Also, talk with your partner about what changes need to be made to the car. Pick specific things, make a list of the things you want to get done. And make sure they get done at a specific time so that you have enough time before an event to fix any last minute things that might come up. Talk about what events you're going to compete at, what your long-term goals are, what are you trying to improve on, what are you trying to get better at. If you guys both know each other's goals and what you're working towards, you can help each other better achieve that. And once again, create a timeline for this. Put actual dates on a calendar of when you want to get things done so that you're both on the same page as, the whole time you're working together. As far as, getting some practice in with your partner, test and tune with your partner. Have your partner sit in the car while you're driving during test and tune and really feel the car out. Decide what the car is doing. Are there any changes that need to be made, adjustments you can make that are going to make the car a little more optimal? It also gives you a basis for comparison on times. If they are timing test and tune, that way okay, my partner's coming in with a 45.464. How far off of that am I, and why might that be? Before you're actually competing. Also at local events, this is a huge opportunity to really figure out the strengths, weaknesses, and driving style of your partner. You can take rides with your partner. You're not going to be limited to just test and tune. You'll actually get to go a whole event riding with your partner, figuring out what it is that they do. Also working with data, you can do that at local events and really figure out, section by section, okay, what kind of elements might my teammate be good at? What elements am I good at? And how can we help each other to get better at the elements that the other person is better at? It also allows you an opportunity to try different setups. Maybe your partner prefers the suspension a little more soft. Maybe they like it a little more stiff. This way you can kind of experiment and see, what changes you might want to make based on what your partner likes as well. It also allows you the opportunity to take risks with your driving style. My partner tends to drive very much at the rear of the car, while I'm very focused on where I'm pointing the front of the car. So, we're coming from 2 totally different styles, and being able to experiment with each other's style and walk each other through how to use that style or what kind of inputs we're using when we're trying to do a particular turn, for example. We can help each other figure out other options for getting around a turn or getting through a slalom that we might not have thought about. And local events give you the opportunity to try that with minimal risk to, contingency you might win or your placement. The next really big thing that I think working with a partner really helps on is a course walk. A partner, when you're with your partner, you can really discuss lines, debate the best approaches. There might be some tricky elements that maybe you're not sure how to take, or you have one idea about and they have another idea about. If you can kind of have a healthy debate with them about what the best approach might be, you might end up finding out things you didn't know or things you didn't think about. And it might be different depending upon your driving style. If you guys, for example, use the front of the rear of the car, the line is a little different. You also want to try and find a communication strategy. that is simple and easy to remember, while still giving you a really good idea of where you want to be when you're moving through a course at speed. It can be really difficult if you're thinking in terms of like how far off, in feet you want to be from a cone. If you can split the course in a different way that's easy to remember while you're moving through that speed, you're going to be able to communicate a lot better with your partner and have a much better idea of where you want to be on course. Your partner can also help point out key elements, key cones, help you identify these things. Also, where do you visually want to be looking on the course while you're out there? And in addition to that, better communication equals better memorization. The more you repeat something, especially out loud, the more firmly you'll have it in your own mind when you go out to compete. They also can motivate you to walk the course more than once. Keep your head in the game, help you visualize the course before driving it. If you have to, talk them through what you're going to do while you're out on course, it just helps firm it up even better in your own mind. So this is how me and my partner communicate line to each other. We actually break up the course width-wise into 3 different sections. For example, around a turn, we'll have an inside section that's closest to your inside wall of cones, a middle section, and an outside section. This way, we can say, okay, when we're entering this turn, we're going to enter from the outside and ideally want to finish on the inside third. And from there, we can, talk about specifically where we want to be in each particular section, which it's easy to think about. It's, everybody can count to 3. So if you can, they're moving at speed, you automatically know where you want to be. You don't have to really concentrate about exactly how far you want to be off of a cone. And during an event, I think the biggest thing is it helps to have somebody on your side, somebody to encourage you. Maybe you went out and had a bad first run, you hit cones. It's really nice to have somebody there who can kind of bring you back down to earth, remind you, of things to focus on, and just encourage you, let you know, okay, you got this. Don't stress out about it. They can also be taking care of things like setup adjustments, taking care of tire pressures, the suspension changes you might want to be able to make on the fly. That way you don't have to worry about it. You can focus on your driving, focus on your visualization, and not worry about all the little odds and ends that are happening on the car. They can also give you feedback about your runs from outside the car. An outside perspective can tell you where you might be offline. They can also, watch your competition. When you're on grid, it can be really hard to get over actually to the track to see what everybody else is doing. So they might be able to go out there and watch and tell you, okay, your competition is a little faster in this section, or they're taking a little different line, and that seems to be working for them. They can also remind you about specific things to fix. They might catch something that you didn't notice from inside the car. Me and my partner like to remind each other to pick 3 specific things we want to fix on each go around. That way we're not, getting overwhelmed by the whole course. We're just picking, specific areas where we can potentially gain a little bit of speed and keeping each other on track with that. And after and in between events, you can also really get a lot of improvement from comparing your data and your GoPro videos. If you have the ability to, put your GoPro videos up side by side. Try to run them at the same time so you can see what you guys are doing differently, in a side-by-side perspective. We actually just picked up a solo storm system this past weekend and gave it a try, and it was really interesting. It can show you, specifically what elements you each might be good at. And what sections you're faster on. Do you have better entry speed, better exit speed? What's your throttle position? And being able to compare and overlay that data with somebody else's can really tell you a lot about your own line, your own inputs, and what you might be able to do differently. So I'm going to finish off with talking about potential drawbacks. We talked about, teaming up sounds great. There's lots of improvements you can make, but there is definitely some catches to that. If you work with another person, you are going to be putting more wear and tear on your car. You've got 2 people driving it instead of 1, so that's twice the damage you're going to be doing, especially with tires. Tires will wear a lot faster if you're working with a partner, and that might be a financial concern as well if you're, bearing the majority of the financial expenses. Which leads me to my next point, financial disagreements. that can really be kind of just a dynamite stick of problems if you guys don't talk that out beforehand or can't agree with how you're going to deal with that. It can really wreck friendships and just create an unpleasant and unfun situation, which, I feel like autocross should always be fun. You shouldn't, be in constant conflict with other people. You're also going to be facing increased competition. Are you the kind of person who's okay with having somebody else drive your car and potentially beat you in your own car? Try to keep an open mind and stay really encouraging of your partner, because the better they get, the better you're going to get. You also have to consider, time constraints. Working with a co-driver takes significantly more time. You have to be able to coordinate with them, work together with them outside of an event is ideal. If you're not able to do that, you're not really going to be making the most out of your partnership. You may also have different setups that you prefer, which can lead to some conflict if you guys can't kind of compromise on what setup you're actually going to run at an event. But I encourage people to keep in mind different setups will make you a better driver as well. It'll make you more flexible, better able to deal with, different car situations, different things that might change on the car. So I encourage you to stay open-minded about your setup and really be willing to work with your partner and compromise with them. As well as personality conflicts. Like I said before, if you can't spend a long period of time with that person, they probably aren't going to be the best partner for you. And it won't make the autocross experience any more fun. Despite that, I think that working with a partner is great. You can build some really long-term friendships, and really you can increase your performance dramatically in a really short period of time by having a second set of eyes.
Okay, are we ready for some Q&A? All right, so what I'd like to do, I've got some questions for each of our panelists, and I'll start off with one for Karen.
Okay.
It's a question that someone asked. I've got two for you. So the first one is, I sometimes see people walking the course on like a Razor scooter or a bike or similar. Do you think that's good, bad?
In some sets of rules, it's against the rules to use a wheeled vehicle to walk the course. In SCCA, it's called the conflict of interest rule. You can't do that. So I honestly have virtually never done it except on a bicycle after I'm done running. And I'm not sure it's of value because it's hard to get up to a useful speed, even on something like that. If you think about it, the average speed on an autocross course is probably in the 40-mile-an-hour range, and I don't know too many people who can do even close to that on a Razor or a bike. So you might be able to think about getting something out of it in terms of line, because you're going to be smoother on a wheeled vehicle than you are walking. But other than that, I really can't see, unless you're really, really fast, how much it would give you.
Okay, super. I've seen people go quickly on Razor scooters and have that end poorly too, so maybe that's All right, so Neal, Ricky asks, what's the best place to mount a camera and the best angle to review?
Yeah, so I actually have a lot of opinions on that particular topic, and I'm actually just about to publish a whole blog post on that exact topic. But the short answer is put it where you can get the most useful data. And when I think of what's most useful to me, it's knowing what I'm doing and what the car is doing, both, not just so that means I don't like sticking it on for the top of the windshield and just getting a view out over the nose of the car. I like putting it between the driver's and passenger seats, a little bit behind. And if you use a moderately wide-angle lens, some of the different GoPros have different options, for example, you ought to at least be able to get a good view out the windshield so you can see what's coming, as well as get a good view of the steering wheel and at least your right hand. Some cars, depending on the layout of the car, you can even see your feet or your left hand, and you ought to also be able to see kind of what direction your helmet is pointing so that you can get some idea of where the driver is looking, which is another big thing that as a coach, I'm always encouraging people to look ahead. If you can actually see that helmet move before you get to a corner, they're looking ahead. So it's pretty. I'm pretty opinionated about that particular topic. But the important thing is, where do you get the most useful data out of that video?
That's great. And I do the same thing in my road race car, middle of the car behind me a little bit so I can see my hands and basically from the two A pillars.
Yep.
Rachel, if I didn't want to or need to share a car, could I still get some of those benefits by teaming up with someone in a different car, or I guess maybe someone that drives the same kind of car?
I think absolutely. As far as driving styles and whatever else, they might, especially if you're driving a similar car, you'll probably have a similar line and similar ideas of how best to manage the course. Even if somebody drives a different car and they're just a really good driver, if you can get them to hop in your car with you, take a couple rides, just give you some pointers of maybe things that you're not aware that you're doing or things you might be able to improve upon. It still gives you a short-term option versus a long-term co-driver of working with other people.
Awesome. Karen, Dan asked, how do you feel about backwards walking the course? He says it seems to help for him to kind of find the optimum points, at least for tracking. He said he used that a lot in his motocross, and he wondered what you thought about that for autocross.
Well, I've known people that did that religiously. I've done it from time to time, particularly if I'm on a course at an event that is going to be used backwards on the second day, then it's value-added time spent in that regard. I suppose it can be useful for getting a different look at the surface. If someone pointed out, if you've got a surface that has something like a painted area, like a runway might have an X through it or something, and you want to get another look at that surface change to see how severe it is and how it might affect you, I can see that being of value. I'm trying to remember the guy who did it religiously was basically looking at it from a dimension analysis standpoint. He was trying to make sure he knew how far it was from point A to point B on the line that he was planning to drive. He was very, very detailed in his focus. I find it a little confusing if I walk the course backwards when I'm going to be driving it forwards, but that's just me. Somebody else might find it useful for a variety of reasons.
Okay, super. Neal, Dave W. asked, for higher-end data loggers, he says the features seem to all be about the same. He said, is the decision then really based upon the analysis software?
Yeah, that's really what it's all about. And most of the high-end data loggers that I'm aware of allow you to download the software and play with it. Even SoloStorm, I believe, has a sort of demo mode. In fact, when you first install the app, if you're on your phone or whatever, it'll actually prompt you, do you want to download some sample data and play with it? And you can do that, I believe, without even unlocking it and see how that works. But yes, so the one that I'm most familiar with in the higher end stuff is Race Technologies, the DL1 analysis software. And they do have a number of modes for autocrossers. The thing that you're usually looking for is what they call an open course, or if they say they do time trials, a lot of times those same features are going to be really useful for autocrossers because you're not doing repetitive laps of the same course. Most of the higher end stuff, of course, originally was built for road racers because they were the ones with the big budgets when these things were really expensive. But so those are the features that you can look for. The software tends to be harder to use because they're aimed at, very kind of, if not professionals, highly trained. Race Technologies, for example, you can get a lot out of it, but you'll need to spend some time learning that software. And then if you happen to know a bit of calculus and advanced math, you can do some really amazing things. Like I've actually been poking around with metrics for tracking how smooth a driver is overall. I'm not sure that time has been necessarily well spent, but it's some interesting metrics that you can play with.
Okay, great. Rachel, Marcin asks, about sponsorship and how that works in the teammate situation. So basically, he says that he runs solo, pun intended, and that he has some sponsors for things like either event fees or some service, whatever it might be. Do you or know anybody that has experience with that and how that might work in a partnership situation, maybe with being either problematic or beneficial for the finances?
I think it's very situation specific. If you are working with a partner or a sponsor, I think you need to really discuss it with the group that's providing sponsorship to you, how they feel about extending those benefits to your partner. Also, you may want to explain to the sponsor the benefits that they may get with extending what they're helping you with to your partner as well. In my situation, what benefits me actually benefits my partner as well too. If we're able, to get reduced prices on parts, that helps both of us because it improves the car that both of us are driving. But I do think it's very situation specific, and it's something that you need to talk over with your sponsor as well as your partner.
Yeah, and I think if there's a question about the technicality, like whoever's driving would be the person that earns contingency, for example. But certainly, if you're pooling your resources, like that's a great way to make either the dollars go further or the learning go further, or whatever you're pooling.
Absolutely.
Karen, definitely. Karen, Joe asked, would wind speed and direction ever have enough effect to change your line or the way you approach course?
Yeah, I saw that. If I were in an A-mod car, a car that depended a great deal on wings for downforce, something like that, maybe even like a street mod car, something with giant spoilers, wings, whatever, then I might be concerned about wind. I drive a little low production car with fairly small aero, so it's not one of my areas of focus. But if I had a car that actually could be affected by turning from going upwind to going downwind, which definitely is a factor for an A-mod car, yeah, then I'd pay attention. In my particular
we should all be so lucky, right?
Yeah, amen to that.
Yeah. A couple quick ones that we can take care of here. Josh asked, are there options other than events for testing and tuning the vehicle setup? And one idea I'd throw out there that I don't think very many people take advantage of is skid pad rental. I know that at Thunderhill Raceway in Northern California, you can rent the skid pad out very inexpensively, and you could effectively have that for 8 hours with you and just a handful of friends and go test and tune however you saw fit. So I think there's definitely options. Does anyone else have any other ideas about testing and tuning that doesn't rely on an event?
I consider every event a test and tune. You need to get to the point where you're comfortable, whatever adjustments your car has. The reality is that, so I guess short story, hopefully I'll keep it short here, is I did a test and tune on the Nationals site 2 weeks before Nationals and thought I had the car absolutely dialed, and showed up 2 weeks later and it was a complete and total train wreck. I don't know if it was temperature difference, something about the surface, whatever. But the one thing the test and tune did allow me to do is really learn what dials did what to the car. And so I adapt. But that's really what it's all about. And so over the anxiety of adjusting the car at an event so that you can figure out how to adjust it to what you need at any event.
That's great feedback. Even with very few runs, you should not be scared about making progress.
Right. I mean, it's somewhat rare for me to leave the car alone between 2 runs. I'm a little on the extreme side, I know, but I do believe that you'll learn, what changes do what as long as you make changes frequently and pay attention to what's going on.
Yep. Randy asked if it would be beneficial to learn left foot braking in a momentum car like a Miata. And I'll just answer that straight up, yes. Any car, it's useful to learn left foot braking in, but the place to learn it is probably not actually in a run. So when I learned it for road racing, I practiced on the street in an automatic vehicle where I could build up the foot memory with my left foot for how hard to push the pedal and to use it instinctively as opposed to how hard you push the clutch pedal. And if you build up that muscle memory before you try to use it in a competition situation, I think you'll find that you have much better feel and much better tact. Otherwise, what happens is you punch the brake pedal as hard as you punch the clutch pedal, and your head hits the steering wheel. So practice on the street, use it on the solo course.
That never happens. I've never done that before.
Yeah. Here's a good one, and maybe this is a Neal question. Marcin asks about setting and checking the tire pressures if the car's been sitting in the sun where one side's hotter than the other. How do you deal with that best?
Generally, the way that I'll deal with that is by kind of paying attention to where I think the tire temps will be after the first run. And so, generally speaking, by the time you're a third of the way into the run, there's probably more heat in the tires from the friction than there ever was from the sun. And so I'll try and set the tires even when, if I was able to set them before the sun came out or whatever. And if the sun came out and one side's higher, I have lowered that a little bit sometimes, but generally speaking, you're aiming for having even tire pressures halfway through the run after the temps have come up due to friction.
Okay. I know I ran an experiment one time at my home where I put a wheel and tire out in the sun and let it get to the middle of the day, and then I put it in the shade like you would have it when you're at the race, and measured every 15 or 20 minutes how much the pressure decreased. And it was interesting to see actually how quickly or slowly, depending on your frame of reference, the temperatures grow or shrink based upon the temperature in the sun. So that's kind of an easy thing you can do at home on a afternoon if you want to get the full picture of what the effect is for your tire size, wheel color. I'm sure makes a difference there. So there's some ideas.
Sure.
Okay. And one thing I thought I wanted to make a comment on. Rachel pointed out that driving other people's cars or sharing the car and different setups makes you more adaptable, and I think that's maybe a greatly underestimated trait as a driver. Randy Popes, who's a Mazda driver, started out in Autocross, as probably a lot of you know, and he credits a lot of his success on street courses in World Challenge strictly to his Autocross background of making him really adaptable, not only in terms of learning a course quickly, but also in having to deal with the kinds of things that crop up over the course of a race. So I think that's a really valuable takeaway from sharing with somebody. Something here for Rachel. David from Canada says that he often relearns the basics while teaching a rookie driver. And I think I've experienced that as a HPD instructor. Can you talk a little bit about when you're either the mentor or the student side of one of those relationships, especially as the instructor side or the mentor side, how do you benefit from that?
Well, I think it just goes back to the more you repeat something, especially out loud, and the more you have to think about how you're going to communicate it to somebody else, the better you're going to understand what it is that you're doing. For me, I'm kind of a seat-of-the-pants driver. I just go out there and do things without a lot of the time thinking about exactly what I'm doing. So working with a co-driver has really helped me to have to put into words what I'm doing and really pay attention to what I'm doing. So I think, as an instructor, when you have to communicate like that, it just reaffirms, like he said, it reaffirms the basics. It makes you get really specific about what each input that you're using. And on the student side, I think sometimes it can get a little overwhelming because there's a lot that goes into every particular element in autocross. But the more that you from somebody else, the more it'll get reinforced and the better you'll understand what's happening out there on course.
Super. Well, we're at 10:30, so I think we're going to call it a day here. And if there's a takeaway for me from all this, it was Rachel's comment that solo is not really a solo sport, and I love that. That's one of the things that I think is so great about solo is that there is so much camaraderie and collaboration. And so I think we've got some ideas here on how to approach your runs, how to analyze your runs, and then how to maybe team up with somebody else to maximize those runs. On the screen here are contact information for the three folks you just heard from. I want to say another thank you to Mazdaspeed for their help and support both in organizing and promoting the webinar. We've still got 130 people here at the end. Hardly anybody's dropped off even though we ran late. So I really appreciate you guys taking some time away from work, both our presenters and our attendees, to chip in and hear what's going on. And for follow-up on this, we have a recording of this presentation that we've just made. So we're going to edit that down, and we will send you a link both to the slides that you've just seen as well as the recording, so you can come back and listen to it another time. and I'll see if we can also get the Q&A there, maybe transcribed or something at the end for people who want to read it. If you have any follow-on questions for us, you can just reply to the email that we'll send out, and hopefully share it with your fellow competitors and let them know that they can come along and listen to it after the fact. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope everyone has a great day and hopefully has a great next event at their next Autocross. Thank you very much.